24 квітня працює медіа-центр України. Мене звати Світлана Чепуренко. Сьогодні Київ пережив страшну ніч, жахливий ранок. Російська
terroristic Russian Federation exercised another massive missile and drone strike. Unfortunately, for the time being, we have 10 dead in Kiev. The clearing of debris is still underway. We keep track of the situation and continue working to make sure that the world hears about this terrible war. We work for the sake of the truth and for the sake of the peace. And now we are going to discuss the medicines for the people, and we're going to discuss whether the reform in the pharmaceutical market is making the medicines cheaper for the people. We know that the prices were decreased for 100 articles. The President of Ukraine, as well as the National Security and Defense Council, identified the reform as among the key ones. So today we're going to discuss the start of the reform, its progress, its prospects, and further steps. And let me introduce our guests. Joining us in the studio are Dmytro Sherembei, head of the Coordinating Council of the 100% Life NGO, Nataliia, professor, senior researcher at the Department of Copyright and Related Rights of the Institute of Intellectual Property of the National Academy of Law Sciences of Ukraine. And also joining us is Nataliia Hutorova, honored lawyer of Ukraine, chair of the board of the Association of Medical and Pharmaceutical Law NGO, and Oksana Kashyntseva, head of the Department of Research of Intellectual Property Rights and Human Rights in Health Care at the Institute of Intellectual Property of the National Academy of Law Sciences of Ukraine. Good afternoon. So as I've just said, the reform has already started. It's launched. Some changes are being implemented. So was this reform discussed with the expert community? Were there any consultations previously? Dear friends, dear colleagues, dear experts, everybody who hand in hand paved this way for liberalization of costs of the medicines in Ukraine. And I have to say that Ukraine has become a hub for reformation of the pharmaceutical system, implementing those provisions into Ukrainian law. Our partners and patient organizations, represented by Mr. Dmytro Sherembei, and Patients of Ukraine, yet another organization that is moving with us. We're moving together since 2014, and today, during the war, just like never, we're facing the problem when all of the developments that were started back in 2014, when the budget started being allocated for relevant programs. Currently, we've achieved the point where we can reform the access to the pharmaceutical agents, the medicines. We have a lot of lawyers here in this room, and the more the lawyers, the more the thoughts. So after verifying every single step, we've launched the reform. So the discussion was going on since 2014 for years, and I think that now we can present some development of a pretty high level. On top of this, our institutions work with budget funding, and hence, what position can we take other than pro-patient position that would support national manufacturer, which pays taxes inside of the country, ensuring access to the medicines inside of the country. So I think that the people gathering here are quite worthy to present all of our developments. So I think we are going to review the reform step by step, and I would like to touch upon the patients level because it's the most important for the patients to benefit from this reform. So is it pro-patient reform And can we expect the medicines to become really cheaper, as well as any other benefits? Well, for us, it's very important for the patient to be a cornerstone of this reform. The process has already launched, but we're seeing obstacles, the obstacles that falsify the idea of the reform itself. If we compare Ukraine to the European Union, I understand that the income of Ukrainians is small, and the cost of the medicines is equal to the one in the European Union. And I clearly understand what does it mean to be not able to afford the medicines on which your life depends on. And unfortunately, this right to the access to the medicines is violated by the market. Those who can intentionally be in cahoots raise the price of the medicines. But if you walk out of this studio and you come to a pharmacy, some of the medicines will be 150% more expensive, because the pharmacy chains, they already have their revenue planned ahead. And if a pensioner comes to such a pharmacy, they cannot afford anything on top of the 100 cheaper medicines. So from the perspective of the monopoly, any monopoly in the market should be destroyed by anti-monopoly committee takes a position of a blindfolded. So during the war, you don't even have to survive against the attacks of the occupier, but you also have to survive in a fight against those who call themselves Ukrainian businesses. It's immoral to profit from chronic diseases of people, especially during the war times. For us, no pharmacy networks, no distributors are a priority. For us, the priority are the patients, because the infrastructure exists to make sure that the patients have access to the healthcare. And if this infrastructure creates obstacles for such access, we are standing on a position to eliminate such obstacles by any ways possible. I had my grandma done at home, so I had to buy medicines in the black market because they didn't exist in Ukraine. I knew she would die. Everybody knew she would die. And only because I had some money, I could afford a high check to buy those medicines in the black market. But I understand that no teacher, no other middle-level specialist can afford anything even on the black market, because the medicines check is shocking. One injection costs 140,000 hryvnia. Unfortunately, people make decisions to try to fight their diseases without medicines. So basically trying to survive. That's shocking. I think that the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers and the CD and all of the reform that is currently being finalized, we're seeing the finalization stage in integration with the European Union market, or installation of the best principles of the EU market. First of all, it comes to the qualification of the people working in the pharmacies, the absence of the marketing contracts for any medicines whatsoever. Marketing contracts for us is the conflict of interest, because as a patient who comes to a pharmacy, I want to get an active agent that is going to help me to survive. And if I'm facing a provisor who is motivated by marketing contract, they will not be motivated by need to cure me, but rather by their marketing contract. That's immoral and unprofessional, specifically in the healthcare field. And we want the marketing contracts to be rescinded. The healthcare should be affordable, and the best recommendations of the European Union should be integrated to the medicines market of Ukraine. That's our position, and if it's not implemented today, it doesn't mean we stop. We're going to keep fighting as long as it's needed. But isn't there a risk that some medicines may just disappear from the market? Yes, there is such a speculation. It's not true by its very essence. Unfortunately, it's being disseminated by those who wield monopolies. In the European Union, there is no single country where the regulations resulted in deficit. There are bright examples. If I move to Poland, for example, I'm going to get a broader range of medicines with higher quality, and it will be way more affordable. And I want the same to be applicable to the patients of Ukraine, but there are a lot more recipes for solution of this problem. And for us, it's important for this access to the medicines to be not only available in the pharmacy networks. We have a lot of retail chains that may sell non-prescription drugs, and it may eliminate the monopoly. Well, you've mentioned that the monopoly significantly influenced the cost of the medicines, but what is it composed of today, and what is the percentage of this marketing component? I'm not gonna call the name of the company which paid 1,700 million Ukrainian hryvnia of marketing contracts last year. Well, basically, that Ukrainian manufacturer has taken that marketing contract and added it to the future price that was paid by you, me, and the spectators. The amount of resources, the amount of capital withdrawn from Ukraine was amounted to 25 billion hryvnia. So any package of medicines that costs 160 hryvnia as it's being manufactured by the factory, its price transforms into 360 hryvnia. But they have their current expenses, and the distributor takes this package and turns the price into 360. But what is the pharmacy network? Is the list premises, a fridge, and a cash desk. There is nothing to justify such price, and marketing contracts is a legalized corruption that results in additional costs for people who are getting ill. That's a primitive form of pulling money out of our pockets. So let's talk a little bit about the following link of this reform. I'm talking about farm companies, but what are the advantages for the pharmaceutical companies on top of the price for the medicines to be justified by the markets, and what are the risks? Well, the risks do exist, but first of all, I would like to say that the matters we're discussing today would not be understood by our colleagues from the European Union, though they just look ridiculous. We're talking about us walking into the direction of European Union, not Eurasian Union. And yesterday we had such a question. To register all of the pharmacies, you know, who were expressing the most contradictory thoughts. They were pharmacists from Kharkiv who came to Kiev, and they were against, because when you ask for legal aid from the lawyers, you know that the lawyers, they are all on the register. When you come to a doctor, the doctors, they're all on the registers. And when you come to a pharmacy, there is a seller who sells you medicines, not pharmacists. Well, you know, I've been studying this issue for more than 20 years, and I can see right away whether it's a seller or a pharmacist. Like you're saying, I want to buy this, and they offer you some medicines that are prohibited to ingest together with other type of medicines. And you can see it right away. They don't know how it works. They check it in their database in the computer, and they don't know what's the active agent, for example, in this or that medicine. And back in 2018, there was an attempt to implement some fragments of this reform. And you know, back then, the pharmacy chains, they were saying that started from this day, our pharmacy would be closed if this resolution would be accepted. And you've asked the right question, whether the medicines will stop coming. Well, but probably the government is a little bit late with implementation of this reform. But look, we have pharmaceutical manufacturers, and the pharmaceutical networks, they dictate the conditions of operation for the pharmaceutical manufacturers. Yesterday, we demonstrated a film about an attempt to implement this reform back in 2015. And one of the owners of the pharmacy chains, who only has 500 pharmacies, they said, if I'm not being paid, I'm just going to push this pharmaceuticals manufacturer away from the market. By the way, I wanted to buy medicines manufactured by one of the manufacturers, and I was responded that we don't work with this manufacturer. And then I asked why, and they said that it just works like this. So we're asking whether we need a register, and the pharmacists, they say they don't need the register. And we keep discussing it, and we listen to the Vox Populi. And in Europe, the pharmacy business is a family business. They have 4 pharmacies at maximum. In our case, there are companies who say that they control 80% of the pharmacy market. So I'm asking one of the people's deputies, like, can you submit the deputy inquiry to the Anti-Monopoly Committee? So basically, we're discussing issues that Europe doesn't even understand. Then qualification. We keep saying whether there may be something like the deputies may say, okay, business is business. Let the owners have their business, but it may be so. But why does the European Union Court has undertaken a decision 12 years ago that the owner of a pharmacy may only be a pharmacist who, according to their qualification, have relevant diplomas and certificates, and if there are co-owners, they are supposed to work in other pharmacies. And now we're discussing whether there can be a case when an owner of a pharmacy network may be a pharmacist. So if we walk towards the European Union, well, I don't think it's even worth any discussion. And when it comes to the marketing agreements, marketing contracts, well, I was talking to the heads, to the owners of the pharmaceutical manufacturers. Some of them pay almost 100% for their pharmaceuticals to end up in the market. 15 years ago, the pharmacies were a family business in Ukraine too, but now we have networks, the chains up to 3,000 pharmacies. In some countries of the Europe, the owners are only allowed to have 1 pharmacy or 4 pharmacies maximum. And we're said, okay, we're working towards European Union, we have to accept all of the European Union rules. And why should we even discuss whether we need the medicines to be sold in the Ukrainian market that are prohibited in the EU, or do we need the pharmacist register? Why are we even discussing it? I mean, I was taking part in the development of the draft laws, and what's most interesting there, that one section that was related to marketing contracts, it has just disappeared. And it had to be staying there in fulfillment of the European Union Directive number 83. Okay, so let's continue our conversation about pharmacies. We have a question from our spectators online to Mr. Sherembei from Ms. Olena Vecherovska. The resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers 168 regulates the margin for the pharmacies. So how could the pharmacists raise the prices more than 150%? And the Minister of Health Leshko still states that the prices were reduced. Well, it was about 100 articles for which the pharmaceutical manufacturers reduced the price. The pharmacy chains never reduced any prices. So they transform 100 hryvnias into 200 and 200 into 400, and they just walk by the way of multiplication. And the owners of the pharmacies, they say, well, I have to compensate it, like those medicines got cheaper, so I have to increase the price for others to compensate. But in those conditions, they had to increase the price of some of the medicines 6 times. Currently, there is no system of control, and I think that the reform should make this market transparent, because the manufacturers are forced to demonstrate what the price of their box is made of, with logistics, manufacturing cycle, electricity, salaries, and everything. You don't have any such cycle for pharmacies. It's not only inflated, the price is like a hippopotamus. I think that we have less food stores than pharmacies, actually. Well, what I would like to add, in Ukraine, reference prices are a notion, and we want to bring our prices in compliance with the European levels. I had a conversation with the owners of small pharmacy chains. They say, we've bought narcotic medicines at this price, and are we entitled to add 10% margin to this? You know, by the way, the pharmacy networks don't want to receive the licenses for narcotic medicines. That's not beneficial for them. That's not profitable. So in that chain, they did buy. I asked, what's the price? What are the medicines? I've compared it to the reference prices, and I said, you cannot add any margin because your procurement price was higher than in the reference countries, in the countries of European Union, such as Poland, Hungary, and others. I mean, that's ridiculous even to discuss it. Just look through the prices in the reference countries, and that's it. Thank you. Well, I have a small comment. Really, a lot can be said here about the cheaper or more expensive prices, but the monopoly is a horrible monopoly that exists in Ukraine. It resulted in effect when a couple of people, 5 large chains, they dictate to the distributors and the manufacturers under which conditions those medicines are going to end up in the market, in their pharmacies. And that's 1/5 of the market, 20% of the market. Well, they officially say so, but the actual percentage is way bigger. The actual share is way bigger. And the distributors are forced to add that marketing margin to their price. They sell the medicines at higher prices than they could sell it in the normal market. Why? Because out of that price, they have to pay 60 or 80%. That's the information from the mass media. We're not going to call names, but we understand that from the perspective of the criminal law, it means corruption, tax evasion, and provision of tax benefits. Given the fact that it's a closed cycle, no single element of this cycle will disclose this information, but this is the situation that exists in the market for the time being. Well, this is a sensitive topic, so I would like to comment too. Our spectators listening to us now, they have to understand when they come to the pharmacies, now they're about to come to the pharmacies for the sedatives, to properly survive this night. They will pay 70% of the price, not for manufacturing or supply of this medicine to the
pharmacy, but only because it sits on some certain shelf that is in their view. And for the provisor, when you say, I have a terrible headache after this night, for the provisor to recommend you this medicine, but it hurts you so bad, but that you're gonna buy the first one that you're suggested. Well, the last comment, and we'll move on. Just a couple of interesting facts. Sometimes I'm being invited as an expert to European countries, and a legal company that services a big pharmaceutical company, Bayer and Bayer, who were withdrawn their capital from Russian Federation after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. They were loath to invest in the pharmaceutical market of Ukraine, so I asked them whether they can invest in the pharmaceutical market of Ukraine. Didn't the situation with the full-scale invasion change everything? And I said, like, the pharmacy chains are still monopolized, and that's why nobody wants to invest in Ukraine. In Ukraine, the pharmaceutical market, and our analogs, our generics, are cheaper than in European Union countries. We may manufacture the bioequivalents of those medicines, but nobody wants to invest in it. And another interesting fact about pharmacy chains, when there was the first attempt to adopt this law on anti-monopolization, the pharmacy chain said that we are ready to reject their marketing contracts, but then they forgot it, so they are ready to make concessions, but the government has to support it. But somehow, you know, I was contacted by a journalist. She was asking me about my qualifications, so I had more than 50 works published in European Union. So you've mentioned the generic medicines, so I suggest we move on to this topic. So the manufacturing of the generic medicines in Ukraine, to what extent is it contemplated by the pharmaceutical market reform, and what are the changes we should expect? Well, starting from 2014, our Institute for Copyright, together with the patient organizations, we deal with development quite significantly, and we've already implemented some part of it into national law. So we were working on patent trolling and patent monopolies. So with no doubt, our institute and Ukraine respects the copyright, but the devil is hiding in detail, and the detail are such that the legislation that we used to have before the 2020 reform that has some positive results. Well, Ukraine was a platform for collecting of the cream by pharmaceutical companies. The patent reform of the generics and the fact that we're working with the patient, you know, it has some postponed consequences. The patents are already issued for the new methods of treatment. Well, the society thinks that it's about the treatment method, but it's more about the monopoly. What we're saying, the reform of the pharmacy segment will be sensed by us way earlier. And when it comes to generics, the healthcare system is like a blood circulation system of a body. Ukraine has a right to import high-quality medicines, and in this case, if we work with our pharmaceutical manufacturers in many areas, thanks to the fact that our interests coincide. So when it comes to the highest value of human interest, which is life and health, this is where we are in disagreement with the national manufacturers. For the patients, it's important to have high-quality medicines at lower price because we are capable at curing as much patients as possible. Let me give you some positive example of the patent reform that has taken place in 2020. And by the way, let's give the Ukrainian Office of Intellectual Property and Innovations their due, who always hold professional consultations, who try to maintain the balance, who for the first time in Europe want to use the provisions of international law, which allow us to liberalize the issue of intellectual property because of the war. There was no such a bloody slaughter in any European country. No European country has an experience of application of those standards. We are the first ones, and hopefully we're going to be the last ones in this sense. We had a very difficult period when we could cure the breast cancer. This is the disease that is unfortunately encountered in almost every family this or that way. So having the political will, having the opportunities to stop the effect of the patent at the stage where the abuses are starting to emerge rather than protection of the copyright. So we get this generic and we leave the bar up to 85%. Can you imagine that life, 15 and 85%? How many lives of the mothers, grandmothers, sisters were saved because the generic entered the market? So we're living in horrible times. But on the other hand, that's a window of opportunities. That's a historic chance for Ukraine. On one hand, membership in European Union and implementation of all that transparency discussed by my colleagues, but at the same time, application of the international law standards. And people may ask, like, what international law? Like, where does it work? But in this area, it does work. We're saying that there are exclusions when it comes to intellectual property, when the whole people are being killed in their territory without even any single attempt to treat them. Okay, but if we bring it closer to the reform, what exactly is it going to change? We understand the meaning of the generics, but what is the reform going to change? Well, the basic track that we're following, on top of that we follow together with the patient organizations, but they have a postponed effect because some patents were issued more than 5 years ago. Also, we work with our friendly deputies. What does it mean friendly? Those who stand on the pro-patient positions. Well, very simply, what is it about? So we have, let's assume we have a patent that is about to expire on the 31st of January. And what are we supposed to have on the 1st of February? We have to have a generic right by the side of the original one in Ukraine. And in order for medicine to end up on the shelf, its dossier should pass a registration. It should be verified. It's not bread. Again, there are even standards for buying bread, but here we buy medicines, and our legislation is so imperfect, and the courts implement our legislation in such a way that the patent is expiring on the 31st of January, and the generics don't appear on the shelves because it's only on the 1st of February that we can ask the National Healthcare Center whether those generics are efficient, what are the components, and stuff like that. Well, but for a generic to be adopted or registered, it has to be referring to the dossier of the original. And this is why there are limits about how long those monopolies can last. And now we have a draft law in Verkhovna Rada that contemplates the period for preparation for the generic, so that on the 1st of February, when the patent expires, we could have this generic in the pharmacies of Ukraine. And they're saying that that's a window of opportunities for our Ukrainian pharmaceutical manufacturers who pay taxes here in Ukraine, who create jobs here in Ukraine. And another component is the certificates of additional protections. In some places, European Union allows it for us, and they say that the big pharma is over there, and there is an additional protection over there, and we have to implement it too, but to implement it in such a way that 20 years of the patent monopoly should be added another 5 years, but in a way to make it fair, so that if the originals were, say, we invested in clinical research, we were buying molecules, like, okay, we were receiving the first registration certificate without any opportunity to refer to somebody, so let us live a little bit longer in your market. And we're saying, okay, all right, but then come to Ukraine not after 15 years when the patent is about to expire, but come to Ukraine in 2 years, in 3 years after the medicine is entering the market. Let Ukrainians have access to your medicines and collect the cream. So it's very simply about complicated things. Yeah, the respect to the copyright exists. We have to stay up to speed with our international partners, but we don't have to have dirty souls represented by the holes in our legislation that allow all those abuses for our patients. Well, probably let's proceed to other matters that are required within the framework of this reform. So first of all, if we transition from emotional expression, that's really important for our spectators. So when it comes to professional expression, I would like to say that the situation that currently exists with the monopolization of the market and the situation when the market prices, the prices for the medicines on which the life of Ukrainians depend, are composed of just very unclear components. The patients pay for the air, for the owners of 1,000 or 3,000 pharmacies chain allowing that medicine to be in their pharmacies. That's a whole threat for the national security. Any monopolization is a threat to national security. Even when it comes to national monopolies, European Union keeps saying, like, let's think about such national monopolies as Ukrzaliznytsia, power grids, to make sure we can overcome those monopolies. In pharmacy businesses in no country of the European Union such monopolies exist. That's artificial monopoly that was created as a result of insufficient regulation and due to desire of some capable businessmen to make more money. Sometimes we may think that, yeah, those are the historic conditions in our market. Let's say we have a Ukrainian exclusive way of development for pharmaceutical market, but no, that's nothing special about it. It's not an exclusive way. That's a wild capitalism that starts working during the primary accumulation of capital. But Ukraine, which is a democratic country, Ukraine is a country that is developing and surviving a terrible war against a powerful aggressor, is capable to overcome those diseases and to overcome them during the best times. So if we're able to overcome them, what are we getting? It's not about us distributing funds or getting some markets. So first of all, what we're getting is we're going to transform pharmacies into healthcare facilities where the pharmacists servicing the patients, providing pharmaceutical services to the patients, will be first of all interested in making sure that the pharmaceutical service results in improvement of the patient's condition, not in growth of their revenues. We cannot say that we build a high-income, say, hospital, and what we do is only remove appendicitis. So this is what happens to our pharmaceutical markets. The pharmacies cease to be healthcare facilities. You know, this situation when the pharmacies are opening side by side and 5 big chains, they have their pharmacies in the same building with no people inside. That's an attempt to push other competitors out of this market. Pretty harsh, pretty clear from the perspective of the fact that the patients pay for the utility services, for the rent, they pay salaries to the pharmacists in the pharmacies, and they are all situated side by side. Do the patients need it? No, they don't. But still, in the rural area, you cannot find any pharmacies because that's not profitable to work there. There is little number of people coming to pharmacies in the rural areas. So if we can implement a European model in Ukraine, but not to implement it right away, but after significant scientific research, after consultations that we hold, we are being asked why the consultation happened. What is this stage? That's a normal way of consultation when the lawyers consult with the patient organizations, representatives of Ministry of Health, representatives of the community about how to better implement this or that reform. Well, in the science, it's called approbation of scientific researches, and this is exactly what was happening yesterday. And after we're through the first stage, there will be more stages of this approbation, and we will be able to formulate proper legislation to provide for consideration to the Parliament and the Cabinet of Ministers so they can be adopted in Ukraine. But we have too little time because every night is the horror that we were surviving yesterday, and we just have to understand we have to save Ukraine and we have to save our people rather than exposing them to the threat that exists, that keeps existing. Dear journalists, do we have any questions on the floor? Good afternoon. Oboz.ua, can you please tell us, according to the data from the Ministry of Health, the prices for Ukrainian manufactured medicines have grown from 26 to 150% during the 3 years of the full-scale invasion. At the same time, almost 70% of the price is being formulated by the manufacturer. Why there is no single audit, no single transparent audit within all those years? Well, let me answer. Let me give you an example. Well, just let's take this water as an example. To manufacture this bottle of water, you need to pump water, plastic, logistics, personnel. So the net cost of this bottle will be 10 hryvnia. You're coming to a general store, and they are entitled to put 20% margin, and in case it costs 12, that's not profitable for a grocery store. And they tell you, like, for example, let us put a 5 hryvnia market based on the marketing contract, and the manufacturer says, but where can I add this price? You add it to the manufacturer. You can add the price of the marketing contract in the manufacturing process. So I come back to my factory and I correct the price, and I come back to the store and I say, okay, now this bottle costs 25 hryvnia, but if I check the details about the marketing contract, I can see that the shops, they have already added that component to the price, but who's guilty is the manufacturer, because they've added the marketing contract price to the price of their bottle, and you can track the dynamics year by year. But if you come to a manufacturer and you're asking the manufacturer, okay, so how many or how much have you paid within those marketing contracts, within the price of the bottle? So the Ukrainian manufacturers pay almost 30 billion hryvnia of marketing contracts per year. That's the clandestine cost of this bottle of water, and it looks like who's guilty is the manufacturer. I'm not going to blame manufacturers or somebody. I just want to demonstrate the picture, the way it looks like. And today the whole picture about this marketing contract looks like we're going to find out what was the real price of this bottle of water. And all those 3 years, it it's been costing like 100%, at least half cheaper. But a month have passed after the resolution of NSCD to reduce the prices for the medicines. 100 articles were reduced in price, and more than 16,000 others have grown in the pharmacies, not coming from the manufacturer. The falsifying of price is happening behind the closed doors when the manufacturers are being forced to sign the corrupt contracts that make no sense. And this is how we come up to this price of the medicines. Well, but there are data from the Ministry of Healthcare that demonstrate that this marketing contract component has not changed within the last 3 years. Again, one company based in Kiev within 1 year pays 1 to 2 billion hryvnia of marketing contracts to pharmaceutical networks. So they added to the price. Well, they are not charitable organization. They have to add this price somewhere, and you're buying it. Like you have really supplied those medicines at 200 hryvnia. But if you take their internal accounting and you see the composition of the cost, you can see that it's not happening within 3 years. It's happening within 15 years, but additional percentage is being added year by year. Well, the situation has become outrageous after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. The prices in the pharmacies have grown 100%. But if you take the price without their margin, the prices will be 3 times smaller. But then you add logistics, marketing contract, transportation, and everything is embedded in the box, in the package. Well, I wanted to add something. Back in 2018, the Anti-Monopoly Committee responded the request of our civil organization that the prices of the medicines were almost 50% higher because of the implementation of the marketing contracts. And we got a letter dated March 2022 from one of the pharmaceutical networks. And there was a requirement in a letter to the manufacturer, reduce the price 20%, then increase the price of retro bonuses, and let's not forget a timely payment of marketing contracts. So this is where 151% are coming from. So we were holding a survey with pharmaceutical manufacturers and the pharmacy chain owners. Before the war, we were paying 40–50% on the marketing contract, but with the beginning of the war, the painkillers that are in such a demand by the wounded, so the manufacturer pays 100% to the pharmacy chains to put their painkillers on the shelves. You know, when it comes to the marketing contracts, it's not only the direct contracts between the manufacturer and the pharmacy chain. On top of those manufacturers, on top of those contracts, there are many gray and black schemes. A lot of companies which belong to B2B businesses, those who implement and provide those services, they are the recipients of those funds, and significant amount of those funds are in illegal circulation. That's why that information that you're having from Proxima company, yes, it's one. But on top of the direct agreements, there are more agreements. And this way of price formulation is quite an efficient form of fighting other competitors who would like to enter the market. Thanks to their professionalism, thanks to their desire to help the patients, they're not going to be able to do so, because when they come to a manufacturer or a distributor, to an owner of the registration certificate, they will be forced to buy certain medicines at a price that is higher than the price at which those medicines are sold at the monopoly chains. So basically, that small number of private entrepreneurs who are still staying in the market, they don't buy medicines from the manufacturers. They buy it from the pharmacy chains because you can buy from the pharmacy chains cheaper than from the manufacturers because the manufacturers have already paid for marketing. And this is how it works. Another question, Maria Kolesnik, Pharma Media. My question is how the prohibition of marketing contracts influence the patients. Well, I think that is going to influence them in a positive way, super positive way. I think that behind the romantic story that the marketing contracts help to promote and make the medicines cheaper for the patients, it's absolutely not true. Because the discount campaigns is one thing, and marketing contracts contemplate a broad range of activities you have to fulfill in case you sign that contract. So there are two bottles of water, 10 and 20 hryvnia. I'm not buying a brand, I'm buying water, but marketing contract obliges the seller to motivate me to buy water at 20 hryvnias. And this is how I lose because I'm buying for the interest of the ultimate beneficiary. So it's a banal desire of profit and multiplication of the cost of the medicines. The European Union rejects this practice. It's sterile in Ukraine. It's the healthcare sector. And from the perspective of medical ethics, as a medic, you don't have a right to make a decision that was paid for. You cannot advertise a handless surgeon only because you have a marketing contract. In case you have another surgeon with hands, that's absurd. That's the choice of quality and qualification. That's not a choice of marketing poster. And those marketing contracts infringe the rights of the patients to access to the medicines because they distort the image of the medicines. If you come to a pharmacy and you say, give me a Ukrainian manufactured medicines, and what you're being told, no, what they manufacture in Ukraine is crap. You better take Japanese or Hungarian. So basically there is, the stationary treatment, and they tell you about big pharma and cost management. All that big pharma are supposed to open their accounts and to demonstrate their accounting, not to work through the private entrepreneur's form of property. Yeah, let me add a little bit. I would like to comment on my colleague's answer. Yes, those medicines sold in Ukraine, they are called traditional medicines like citramon. Yeah, it's cheaper than the analog manufactured in European Union. I mean, it's a traditional medicine that has been manufactured for 50 or 60 years. I mean, let's put aside the quality part and others. Well, back in 2018, there was an attempt to adopt this law. Remember, I told you, they were putting posters on the pharmacies like, we're going to close on this or that day if that law would be adopted. And then when they've seen that the law was adopted in the first reading, they said they would reject the marketing contracts, but they wanted to remove the requirement on ownership by pharmacists. Well, any more questions on the floor? Well, after the cancellation of the voluntary marketing contracts, the manufacturers stopped paying for them, but the prices have never changed in the pharmacies. So basically, if a lot of money is being spent on this marketing, why aren't we seeing any significant improvement of prices in the pharmacies? So I think it's more about the
pharmaceutical manufacturers. It would be good to address this question with the 5 owners of the biggest pharmacy chains in Ukraine so that they open their accounting and will solve this problem. But I'm gonna tell you beforehand, they're not gonna do it, because in Ukraine the pharmacy chains are way bigger, 3 times bigger than in any country of European Union. Not like 10%, not 20% bigger, but 3 times bigger. So you basically have to maintain all that personnel, all that infrastructure, the square meters that make no sense because it's like the same owner using 3 different brands. It makes no sense to maintain 3 refrigerators, 3 systems, and everything. There are people you have to address this question with. Open their accounting, open their records, and demonstrate it to the people. What is their infrastructure made in terms of money? What is the amount of goods they're receiving? What was its price? And what is the marketing contract component? And what is the net profit received by the owners of the chains in the end of the year? I think that will be a very simple. Well, you know, in the pharmaceutical factory, it's difficult to sort out the chemicals and stuff, but here it's only going to take 10 lines, and you're going to see where the medicines price are coming from. Well, I would like to add, my colleague mentioned about the gray schemes, and it's not only words. Yesterday we've demonstrated from the court rulings website. So there was arrest put on all those firms, agreement with which the pharmacy chains are entering into agreements. We preserve those agreements. We have some insider information. So there was an attempt to identify and to hold accountable for violation of the tax legislation. Well, there's a lot of cases like this. You understand what was the amount of funds circulating there. So, but there was no official finalization of that case. There was only an attempt. There was a ruling by a judge. Everything was proved, but the schemes still exist. Well, let me try to explain in simple words. So, really, now in compliance with the law, the marketing contracts are prohibited. There is the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers according to which this situation should be rectified. And then let's imagine a manufacturer who wants their products to be sold through one of the 5 biggest pharmacy chains, which take 15 to 20% share of the market. So they come to the owner and they're saying, like, why would I need your products? We have more national manufacturers, and in this case we're talking about generics. They have the same name. There is analgin manufactured by 3 different manufacturers. There is Citramon, Corvalol, the cheap medicines that are really in demand today. And just imagine a manufacturer who is being said that the Citramon line or analgin line should be closed because those 5 owners, they coordinated it among them. If you don't pay any premium to us, we're not buying your products. And that's not necessarily the mandatory agreements between the manufacturers and pharmacy chains. Unfortunately, now in Ukraine, we have a lot of gray and black schemes. There is a reason why a number of those pharmacy chains is registered in offshore jurisdictions. That's an open information, and I shouldn't explain it. What happens next to the journalists? You know it better than me. Well, I want to thank you, thank our speakers. We were discussing the pharmaceutical market and fair prices for the patients, and Ukraine Media Center will continue in half a year. Transparency International Ukraine will present their report for the last year. Stay tuned.